Welcome to Window Dressing, American Trash and National Treasures. I'm Madeline Jane Auble. The next two episode topics fall into the treasures category of my second season theme, with a splash of trash. I will discuss Angela Lansbury, specifically her role as Jessica Fletcher on the CBS series Murder, She Wrote. The competing topic for this first episode is Playboy, by way of a Season 2 episode of Murder, She Wrote that tackles Hugh Hefner and his use of home video and surveillance systems inside the mansion. I will focus on that episode for Part 1, and Part 2 will be a broader overview of the series, including several of my favorite episodes. My sources for the information about Playboy are referenced throughout this episode, and in the description wherever you are listening. It may be difficult for some listeners to understand, but the idea of surveillance systems in your home was a novelty in the 1980s. Initially, people with such systems were wealthy. The advent of home movies and the ability to record pictures and sound changed the landscape of what was private quickly. Those changes have deeply felt consequences in the world we live in now, and also the perception of what is ethical with the use of such equipment. Now that conversation would be about internet surveillance, Alexa, and AI. Hugh Hefner was one of the first to install a top-of-the-line surveillance and at-home entertainment system. This fact in and of itself helped shape the perceived masculinity of such systems. Knowing as much about Playboy as I do, and having as much interest and empathy for the women who have been helped and harmed by the now-fallen media giant, makes me an especially interested viewer of the Murder, She Wrote episode inspired by Playboy. Christopher Bundy died on Sunday. It is littered with references to stories that had been coming out of the mansion for decades by the time it aired in 1986. Since Hefner's death, those stories have come to light through docu-series like The Secrets of Playboy and Playboy Murders, along with tell-all books that predate Hefner's death, like Jennifer Saginor's A Childhood Lost Inside the Playboy Mansion, and Holly Madison's Down the Rabbit Hole, among many others. I rely heavily on all those resources in this episode. A lot of the stories that are told center around surveillance, film sex, and even snuff films, which make the already nefarious motivation of heavy surveillance and home video systems incredibly disturbing when referenced alongside Playboy. Angela Lansbury plays writer and citizen detective Jessica Fletcher in Murder, She Wrote, with her signature whimsy and down east know-how. Fletcher is the American Miss Marple with a modern working woman twist. Lansbury was born in London to an English father and an Irish mother. Her mom, Moyna McGill, was also an actress. The family came to America, first to New York and then to LA, in 1940. Lansbury signed with MGM in 1943. I'm not going to cover her entire career, which spans 80 years and includes many stage performances, but I will touch on moments that affect me or feel relevant to her character on Murder, She Wrote. Lansbury wasn't always a revered citizen detective. She started her career playing tawdry little maids and the like with the twinkle in her eye that only a teen can bring to such roles. Her first film role was in the 1944 classic Gaslight. She was 17 years old. She played the maid of Gregory Anton, played by Charles Boyer, and Paula Alquist, played by Ingrid Bergman. Lansbury's character, Paula, is a trashy little temptress with a Hockney swagger in her speech who flirts with Gregory in front of his wife. She inadvertently aids in Gregory's scheme to get his hands on his wife's jewels using psychological warfare as a means to that end, thus creating the term gaslight. Please watch this movie if you haven't seen it. The following year, she had a significant role in the 1945 film adaptation of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Lansbury plays Sybil Vane. Sybil is a nightclub singer who catches the eye of Dorian, played by Herb Hatfield. Dorian is a hedonistic ne'er-do-well with money and a predilection for ruining the lives of young women. Sounds a bit like Hugh Hefner, but Dorian is much more handsome. Sybil falls in love with him, but he breaks their engagement because she gives in to his carnal advances. He sets her up and then throws her away like trash. She kills herself as a result. This film should be watched right after Gaslight. Lansbury was in two noirs in the 1950s. The 1955 film, A Life at Stake, and the 1956 film, Please Murder Me. Both are worth watching, but particularly the latter. In 1962, she played Eleanor in The Manchurian Candidate, mother of the protagonist, played by James Gregory. Lansbury was in her mid-30s, but had started to be cast as aging and motherly. The year before The Manchurian Candidate, in 1961, she played Elvis's mother in Blue Hawaii. She was 36. He was 26. In 1970, Lansbury relocated to County Cork, Ireland. This was a response to her home burning down in Malibu and her son overdosing on heroin. He survived and recovered in Ireland. This part of Angela Lansbury's history always stuck out to me because of my own history with heroin. I wanted my mother to take me to Ireland and help me recover, just as Angela had done with her son. It doesn't hurt that, like Lansbury, the Irish side of my family is from County Cork. Murder, She Wrote premiered in 1984 and had a 12-season run. The show's creator, Peter S. Fisher, died 1 year after Angela Lansbury's death in October of 2023. He got his start as a writer. He worked on the 1975 to 1978 detective series Beretta. This is a beloved show, even though it had a short run. He also wrote for the 1973 to 1978 action crime drama Kojak, before creating Murder, She Wrote. After Fisher retired, he wrote a 20-book series called Hollywood Murder Series. Murder, She Wrote centers on Jessica Fletcher, a widow and retired schoolteacher who lives in Cabot Cove, Maine, filmed in Mendocino, a Northern California town. She writes a mystery novel in her spare time that her nephew Grady Fletcher, played by Michael Horton, submits for publication without her knowledge. The book is published, and so begins Jessica's flourishing career as a mystery writer. She travels the world, visiting friends and family, and gains a reputation as a top citizen detective, who mysteriously attracts and then solves murders wherever she goes. The remarkable thing about Angela Lansbury's Jessica Fletcher is she is a single woman over 40 without any love interest, excluding the first 2 episodes. This was one of the most successful shows of all time, and Jessica is one of the most beloved characters of all time. The fact that she achieved that without having to fuck a new guy every week puts her miles ahead of Magnum PI's leading man Tom Selleck at the time. Of course, we know the rules are different for women, especially women who can't pass for teenaged. The elements that would work against a typical protagonist worked for Jessica. Her age and her status as an unmarried widow who's not looking for love are exactly the qualities that gave Jessica freedom. She found, or rather the writers found, the loopholes for female protagonists of a certain age. She was married, but he had passed away, so she had done her time, so to speak. She was no longer a sexual object, therefore was allowed to move freely with very little observation or fanfare. The phenomenon of being invisible over age 50 only seems to afflict women, but it does work in favor of her freedom in this one instance. Jessica is allowed to participate because she, in many ways, has opted out of participation as defined by sex, love, and career. Remember, she's a retired schoolteacher turned mystery writer, and her first book was published not through her own efforts, but the attempts of her male nephew, Grady Fletcher. School teacher may be the only universally acceptable job for a woman throughout the last 100 years. This fact, along with her lack of reward-seeking for her work, makes it clear that she is not only playing by the rules of her sex, but has done so her whole life. The fact of her book being published is treated, even by her initially, as silly. She refers to writing as a hobby. At the beginning of the series, when we were still in the Reagan years, pains are taken to keep her character apolitical and not offensive, which specifically means distancing herself from the word feminism. On her first book tour, she is asked about her quote-unquote feminist work, and she responds to the reporter with a story about how much she loved her husband, Frank. It is Jessica's lack of reliance on any specific structure, man, or even job that gives her freedom. It's her self-directed embodiment that makes her a feminist, even if we weren't allowed to call her one. The episode entitled Christopher Bundy Died on Sunday aired on March 30th, 1986. It coincided with the release of the Mies Report in July of 1986. The Mies Report was the result of the Attorney General under Reagan's Commission on Pornography. This included a discussion of Playboy and testimony from Mickey Garcia, former centerfold and head of Playboy Promotions. She testified to the conditions and treatments of bunnies and centerfolds at Playboy from the years she worked for the organization, which included charges of sexual harassment, rape, systemic degradation, and more. Her testimony was a triumph for women, but it was also a victory for right-wing politics, which only confuses the matter further in the decades to come. The right-wing anti-porn agenda didn't really care about the women involved. The primary concern was protecting good men from bad women. This is the political backdrop of this week's discussion. A short story Jessica wrote is going to be published in, as she puts it, a girly magazine. Jessica and her nephew Grady, played by Michael Horton, are driving to see relatives when they decide to stop at the mansion and hash out the details of Jessica's contract. She had originally agreed to publish her first short story in Literary Lines magazine. Grady is the accountant for that rag. But Literary Lines was recently purchased by Christopher Bundy, the Hugh Hefner character played by Bert Convy. And Jessica wants out of the agreement now that she knows what kind of magazine it will be printed in. Jess and Grady arrive at the mansion, and just like Jessica's Cabot Cove home, it is located on the coast of California and not in Maine. This mansion has real Humbly Hill vibes, even though it's played like it's the East. Grady, single yet again, falls head over heels for the latest centerfold model who's mid a poolside photo shoot. Her name is Millicent Moore, or Millie. She is played by Catherine Moffat. Millie and Grady begin a harmless flirtation while Jessica attempts to get out of her contract to no avail. Jessica notices that the mansion is crawling with cameras. She doesn't know that they are wired for sound in addition to picture, just as they were in the Playboy mansion. Bundy convinces them to stay overnight so Jessica can speak to his lawyers in the morning about getting out of her contract. At dinner that evening, an angry visitor interrupts, Chester Harrison, played by none other than the future Unsolved Mystery host, Robert Stack. Chester confides in Jessica that he is fighting for his publishing house, which is now under the financial control of Bundy. In the morning, over coffee and surveillance system talk, a shot is fired. Jessica and the house security officer run to the foyer just in time to see Bundy's body fall down the stairs from a fatal gunshot wound. The Fog Island-esque whodunit begins. Chester is the only one that made it out of the house. He is quickly apprehended and arrested. But it wasn't Chester who pulled the trigger. It was Christopher Bundy's own flesh and blood, his niece Vanessa, played by Carol Lawrence. Vanessa is motivated by her father's suicide. She blames Bundy and by extension his exploitation of vice, which in the worldview of Reagan politics includes the use and abuse of women, for her father's death. This episode is fairly complicated, with a lot of moving parts, but the elements of interest to me are surveillance, home video, and the Playboy Mansion. Not to mention, it is a very good example of the political and social tightrope that Jessica Fletcher walked on the run of the show. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few things that skew right politically, especially in this episode, but for the most part, Murder, She Wrote holds up as a relatively middle-of-the-road time capsule of America between 1984 and 1996. The first scene I'm going to talk about is Jessica and Grady's arrival at the Bundy Mansion. She is there to prevent her short story from being published in Christopher Bundy's magazine, as previously mentioned. Grady is there to accompany her and is the accountant for the recently acquired magazine where Jessica's story was originally to be published. Jessica and Grady enter the house by way of the grounds, featuring a gracious pool where Millie's photo shoot is in progress. Jessica is wearing a mauve dress with a round gold brooch on her left lapel, over her heart, as is the custom, and a delicate multi-chain gold necklace. Grady sees and immediately falls for the blonde babe, Millie. Jessica notices Grady's affection for Millie and scolds him because he just said he doesn't want to fall in love at first sight. She does not judge Millie or treat her like she is a tramp or undeserving of anything, particularly her nephew's love. This is an ultra-important point of character about Jessica Fletcher. She never slut-shames. A helicopter comes in for a landing on the property's lawn. Millicent gets up from her place poolside and stumbles along to meet the copter's occupant. It is Christopher Bundy. When Bundy exits the aircraft, he walks quickly past Millie. He tells her to get back to work. She says, "But Mr. Bundy, the cement by the swimming pool is so hot that my feet are starting to get blisters." He says, "For what I pay you, you can buy a case of ointment." Centerfolds have never made that much money. In the 1970s, it was $5,000. In the 1990s, it was $15,000. And in the 2000s, it jumped to $25,000. These amounts were doled out over the course of 2 years. The payments were broken down sometimes into 3 separate payments. Being a centerfold isn't just one photo shoot and then a payout. It involves press, travel, and morals clauses. You can't take other work that is considered to be in conflict with the Playboy brand and so on. So while that is not chump change, it is barely a lucrative career, especially when compared to the amount of money the company and Hefner himself were taking in. Bundy walks past Jessica and Grady on his way into the house. When Jessica states her name, Bundy stops in his tracks, aware of the contract dispute. He lays on what he mistakenly thinks is charm. He apologizes and then makes her wait until he is free to have a chat with her, passing the pair off to his secretary in the meantime. Jessica and Grady are introduced around to Bundy's sister and her children, who are engaged in a game of lawn croquet by the pool. Bundy's nephew, Antonio, played by Bobby DeSico, has a handheld video camera glued to his shoulder. He is filming everything, but particularly Millie. Antonio's camera-laden character is a nod at the ever-present influence of Hefner in culture. The filming of everything and the oh-so-male attempts to be a master over his own domain, meaning women, in this case Millie, whom Antonio is having an affair with. Bundy's niece Vanessa, played by Michelle Nicastro, offers Jessica a drink. Jess asks for a ginger ale. Vanessa is wearing a white and black sweater with a matching skirt that falls right below her knee and spectator shoes with big white scrunched socks. She looks like her name should be Heather, not Vanessa. She admits that her doctor said she has to stop drinking because, in her words, "My liver only has 6 months." Jessica takes in the information this very young girl is offering her with mild alarm, but not 1 ounce of judgment, as is her signature. Vanessa asks Jessica if writers really get their inspiration from the world around them. Jess says yes. Vanessa says, "Well, keep your eyes open. There's a great book in this family, Mrs. Fletcher, like something out of Eugene O'Neill. You could call it A Long Day's Journey into Oblivion." Eugene O'Neill is a Murder, She Wrote universe stand-in for Tennessee Williams. The proposed book title also references the 1962 film Long Day's Journey into Night. The potential book title posed by Vanessa is apt considering the titles of the books that came out decades later based on life inside the mansion, like Down the Rabbit Hole, Playground, A Childhood Lost Inside the Playboy Mansion, and John Dante's Inferno, A Playboy's Life. When Jessica does get to speak to Christopher Bundy, it's inside his wood-paneled library, filled with unread first editions and elaborate but cheap floral arrangements. She tries to get to the point of the contract, but he interrupts her, offers her a seat, a drink, anything to disarm her and take control of the situation. There is a photo of the current centerfold, Millie, on an easel behind Bundy's large wooden desk. She is wearing a leotard and reading. Perfect set deck detail. The room itself looks just like the Playboy Mansion, an over-furnished den of iniquity with old money decor paired with a Coke Den coffee table and a fern on a pedestal. Jessica says, "Can we get down to business?" Bundy responds, "You are incensed at the idea of your stories appearing in a magazine sprinkled with photos of unclothed young ladies. Am I close?" Jessica says, "Dead on target." He laughs mockingly, as men seem to think it is their right to do to women, especially men like Bundy, who think a certain kind of young lady, as he puts it, are naturally inclined towards sex work or service. He continues his attempts to get Jessica to skip her trip to see family in Poughkeepsie and stay overnight. She says no. He accuses her of being afraid that she will get to know him and like him, and it will, quote, "destroy all those stereotypical notions buzzing around in that pretty little head of yours." He tries a different tact, appealing to her feminist side, as if he understands the word. He says, "I was always told that J.B. Fletcher was an independent woman who makes up her own mind about things." The classic Playboy argument of female empowerment, only when it benefits the sexual appetite of men and boys, of course, seeps out of the wood-paneled walls as he says this. You see, if you're not one of the young women naturally inclined towards exploitation, then you are expected to work in service of men by supporting their right to exploit women. Side note, I don't think all women who pose nude are exploited. I do think Playboy and Hugh Hefner specifically used very young women and ruined lives, all whilst normalizing women being seen and treated as disposable. Rating women based on looks is one example of a Playboy practice that has infiltrated deep into our current culture. Inside the mansion, this started on Pig Night, which was a Thursday night tradition where prostitutes would be brought up from the streets by pimps to fuck Hefner's friends, often in a very humiliating fashion. The rating system was also utilized when choosing young girls who didn't make the magazine but ended up in what Jennifer Saginor termed mini-mansions or shadow mansions, where they were essentially turned out in exchange for the promise of modeling work. I was recently introduced to a group of people by someone very close to me. A young woman in this group casually referred to herself as a 4 who fucks like a 7. I was incredibly taken aback and appalled. She did this after a man in the room bragged about the 8 he had a date with, or something to that effect. The shocking part was that I was the only one in the room who noticed, let alone responded with anger. It wasn't the rating that was so shocking, but the response, or lack thereof, to it. To be clear, this woman was joking. and she was only modeling behavior that surrounded her, but this boys' club membership comes at a cost to women. I'm not trying to drag her through the mud or call her out. Just point out what kind of woman is acceptable versus unacceptable, who is seen as sweet, and who is a bitch. If it isn't clear, I'm the bitch in this scenario. I was admonished for being a bitch, specifically for being rude to the group by a man whom I trusted. His take on the exchange was that I was treating the group like I was better than them by responding angrily. I remember specifically saying, "It is gross to rate women and fuck you." As a woman, you learn to deflect. You try to laugh it off, or you lean into the role assigned to you. But when I was shamed for being rude and essentially called a brat, I broke. I felt ill for 24 hours after. I feel like my responsibility was to myself and women, not the feelings of people who talk about women as props, and most definitely not to the defenders of their right to do so. I was made to feel like my attractiveness meant I had to be nicer or more caring, or it could appear that I looked down on these people. It is right out of the Playboy playbook, or in other words, the masculine-ruled American culture that says women need to be sweet or of service or in support of men. Even good guys partake and push forward these cultural norms to the detriment of the women in their lives and ultimately themselves. Jessica sees right through Bundy's, as she puts it, obvious ploy. She laughs at the snake oil he's peddling, but ultimately decides to stay when he says that she can be present when he speaks to his lawyers in the morning about her contract. She goes to call her family in Poughkeepsie to let them know she will be arriving a day late. Bundy turns to leave and says he will give her some privacy. Jessica says, "Privacy, Mr. Bundy?" She eyes the surveillance camera in the corner of the room. He dismisses her fears by saying it's for safety. There is no sound, and there are none in the bedrooms. Of course, in the real Playboy Mansion, they were in the bedrooms and every other room in the house. They weren't just surveilling, they were recording. The tapes were collected, cataloged, and used against celebrities, politicians, and the like. Not to mention creating a constant state of revenge porn fear for every girl that came through his bedroom doors. In 2011, 3 women went after Hefner for the tapes. Nikki Garcia, who testified in the Meese Commission, Hefner's former girlfriend Sandra Theodore, and Chicago bunny mother P.J. Maston. They were told that the tapes were to be destroyed upon Hefner's death. Specifically, Hefner's private secretary Mary O'Connor would be in charge of the disposal. After dinner that evening, Jessica is in the library alone looking for a book to read before bed. Fellow writer Chester Harrison walks in and reintroduces himself to Jessica. In addition to meeting earlier in the evening at dinner when Chester interrupted the meal and made a scene, the two had met at a book fair. He says he is surprised to see her here. She says the same of him. He begins to explain that he is there to fight for his publishing house, which Bundy is attempting to take over by leveraging Chester's debt. Jessica interrupts Chester, points out the camera in the room, and motions for them to turn away from it to prevent their lips from being read. But this effort is in vain. Bundy lied about the surveillance system only recording video. Chester says, by way of explaining how he got into such a bad financial situation, "Good wine doesn't come cheap, Mrs. Fletcher, and neither do bad women." In the A&E documentary, The Secrets of Playboy, there is footage from an interview Hugh Hefner did where he compares himself to Christ. He says, "He forgives the whores," as if Hefner's use and abuse of women is an act of charity because the dirty whores are the ones that need forgiveness. That kind of thinking is omnipresent in our culture. It feeds into the narrative that the good guy, Chester, isn't to blame for his financial misfortune. It is the bad women he bought and paid for like his own personal cattle, or in this case, scapegoats. God may forgive the whores, but no one will forgive the monsters. The next morning, Jessica pokes around the security system out of curiosity and potential research for a new book. Jessica and the security guard watch on one of the security monitors as Vanessa looks through books in the library and spills a dish of candy in the process. They hear a shot and run out of the room just in time to see Bundy fall to his death from the entryway staircase, the apparent victim of a single gunshot wound. Chester leaves the mansion right before the shot is fired, making it appear as if he was fleeing the scene. The police are called and the accusations fly. Jessica realizes that the surveillance system records, therefore footage can be taped and looped back. It is in part the direction of the sun in the library in the morning versus the afternoon that helps her come to this conclusion. Jessica is awesome and is always considering lighting and drapery. Vanessa's alibi was created with a recording. She killed her uncle. In a dramatic confrontation, Jessica lays out in front of the whole group how she pulled it off, detailing Vanessa's recorded alibi and her passage to her uncle's room up the back stairs, one of the only places without cameras. She shot him point blank as he was fleeing through the hallway, and she was standing in his bedroom. An interesting image considering the intimacy of being murdered by your niece in your own home. But an apt ending for a man who set the rules and demanded that everyone play by them. That kind of control rips intimacy up at the root. Vanessa was just deadheading already destroyed roses. Wearing a pale blush sweater, matching pants, and a white blouse over the sweater in an amazing soft-focus 80s layered look, Vanessa tearfully confesses. She explains that her father killed himself because her uncle refused to lend him money. Vanessa says the most fantastic line about her father. She says, "He always had time for me when no one else did, time to listen and time to share." The Disney-fied words delivered by Vanessa about her daddy epitomize the value system of Hefner's right-wing opponents. Vanessa's poor dad, like Chester, was in debt, likely from Bundy or his world preying on their base instincts, or as Chester put it, good drink and bad women. Isn't it funny how women are seen as vice, legally, morally, and culturally blamed for the downfall of men, even when we have fitted ourselves into our assigned role in service of them? The Mies report and many other anti-porn agendas were twisted to serve the rhetoric of the good family men who were corrupted by wicked women and flesh peddlers like Bundy. That is the problem with right-wing arguments against porn, Playboy, and men like Hugh Hefner. The purpose of their opposition is to protect the good men. The women involved are not only seen as disposable, but also complicit. That's why a pimp is emulated and a bottom bitch insulted. Jessica ultimately did what a feminist does best: witness the truth, bear it, and speak it, even if the truth, in this case, is pretty heavily shaped by Reagan-era politics and general misogyny. Next time on Window Dressing, American Trash and National Treasures, we will continue discussing Murder, She Wrote, in a not-so-Playboy-focused way. Please join me for some of my favorite Murder, She Wrote episodes, like the Magnum PI crossover episode, Murder Takes the Bus, and Truck Stop. Thank you for listening. I'm Madeline Jane Auble.